Welcome back to Gray and Gritty. My name is LJ Winnefeld.
And hello, everybody, again. My name is Sandy Winnefeld.
And Dad, how about that hockey game on Sunday? Were you awake when it was going on? Where were you?
I was on my way back from a hunting trip in Texas, and I was in a car trying to follow it as best I could. And it was wonderful to hear that they had won. And obviously, I caught up on it later.
Yeah, it had to be one of the best hockey games, maybe other than Game 5 of the Stanley Cup when the Caps won, but one of the best hockey games, if not the best hockey game I'll ever watch in my life.
Yeah, and when you leave your teeth on the ice and score the winning goal in the Olympic hockey game, you'll never forget that. Every time you wake up in the morning and brush your teeth, you can think about what a successful day that was. But you got to hand it to Canada. What an amazing country, what an amazing hockey culture, what an amazing hockey team. It's quite an accomplishment to beat a team like that.
Well, and as we've said before, one of the greatest games we've ever been to has been in Canada. I think every American, if you're a hockey fan, if you were watching on Sunday, you need to make a pilgrimage up to somewhere in Canada if you can get tickets and go to a game, because it is, I think, noticeably different up there because it's their home sport. It's, it's their pastime. It's like their baseball, and it's awesome. And a hell of an effort by the Canadian team. They were dominating that game, but fortunately for us, in overtime, both games, both the women's and the men's, we ended up on top. So,
yeah, gotta love it.
The number one issue, though, for the State of the Union tonight is probably not going to be hockey. It's likely going to be Iran. And there's been some updates, Dad, but can you give us a refresher of what's happening over there right now with respect to U.S.-Iran relations?
Yeah, by the way, I think the two biggest issues in the State of the Union are going to be tariffs. The president's going to be very sharp about that, I think, in the wake of the Supreme Court decision, but also Iran. And as you read in the media, there are an amazing number of U.S. forces flowing to the region. The media's been tracking the USS Gerald Ford and its progress across the Atlantic and through the Strait of Hormuz very carefully. And my understanding is that they are sort of pausing right now and rearming, refueling, that sort of thing. I won't say where, because that would be violating operational security, even though it's probably in the media. We know that the USS Abraham Lincoln is probably out there in the Gulf of Oman ready to go, but there are a lot of other forces that are being moved over. And, the president has sort of put himself out on a limb here. If he doesn't strike, then he could be accused of the taco piece. If he does strike, he's taking a risk that, he can pummel Iran, and if they don't crumble, then that's a real victory for them. Iran doesn't have to win; they just have to survive. Now, some interesting timing. The State of the Union is going to be on Tuesday night. There's a very important negotiation taking place in Geneva between Iran and the United States, and it's pretty common knowledge that the Iranians may be underestimating what's happening here and may be overestimating their ability to weather an attack. At the same time, the demonstrations are starting to kick up a little bit in Iran, which is yet another impetus to strike. So it's very possible that this coming weekend we could be seeing quite a lot of activity over Iran, unless Iran comes up with a really good approach at Geneva. Remember, they're the chess players of the world. They invented that game, and they're usually pretty good negotiators, so it's going to be a fascinating week ahead.
Two quick points before I want to get into the main thing that we're going to talk about today. The first is I saw on social media that a bunch of Iranians got a text message today that says the American president is a man of action, period, wait, period. And that was all over social media. So I don't know the actual validity of that reporting since it was on social media, and I haven't seen it been picked up by some of the mainstream media companies. But if that's the case, one, is that just an information campaign? Likely. But it also could be hey, stay calm, because they've been trying to stoke these protests. The president said, that he was going to go to the rescue of these Iranian protesters for a long time. And maybe this is just another aspect of it. And then the second thing that I saw recently, earlier today, was that it seems like a lot of close advisors to the president are telling him to not take kinetic action against Iran, with Lindsey Graham being the hawk in the room saying that, no, Mr. President, we need to strike. But I saw more and more reporting on that, and I think the president actually truthed out recently in the last couple of hours, saying that, General Dan Kane was not against not striking Iran, if that's a double negative, but that he was actually on board. So I think there is probably some internal division, as there isn't really any deliberation, I think, when you do strikes. If I'm not mistaken, Dad, there are people on both sides. They're weighing all kinds of options. Real quick, could you just walk us through maybe if you're in that National Security Council, if you're in the Situation Room, what is that conversation like? Is the president taking both sides? Is it, typically dominated by one side or the other? What does that feel and look like?
I think in most administrations there would be people on either side of the issue, laying out the risks and the pros and cons and that sort of thing. I think in this administration, it's very likely that people are sniffing to see what the president is thinking, and then they're just telling him what he wants to hear. And I think it's just a function of the personality of the president. I'm not making any political comment there. I just think that's the way this administration works. The interesting conversation would have been in the tank, and I think I kind of want to lay out a little bit of defense for General Kane, because there were some tweets that came out today, some various posts that said, he was, against it, it was risky, that kind of thing. And just based on my own experience, having spent many, many, many hours in the tank, the Joint Chiefs are going to get in there in a very private setting and talk about the risks of any operation, pros and cons. It's their responsibility to do that. They would be very irresponsible if they didn't consider the risks of doing that.
What is the tank? Can you describe that for us?
The tank is the room inside the Pentagon where the Joint Chiefs of Staff meet. And typically you would have a brief. There would be a number of people in the room, including the chiefs at the table, and then other people at back benches, including briefers and note takers and that sort of thing. And then when you actually discuss the real sensitive pieces of this, everybody clears the room into what they call deep executive, and you would have just the chiefs in the room. Now, it's possible that they would actually talk about it. Hey, just as an example, one of the risks is if you expend a whole lot of munitions in Iran, then that's going to really deplete your inventory, particularly of the higher end, most expensive ones. That could impact your ability to do something somewhere else in the world. That's called opportunity cost. And they would be discussing things like that. And it's possible that a chief would go back brief his key staff or members of his staff, and somebody could have said something, and the next thing you know, the media is picking up that General Dan Kane is against this, which is probably very inaccurate, very unfair to characterize it as that. General Kane's counsel to the president is something that is and should remain private.
Absolutely. I think that that's an important picture. The fact that even though they may have dissenting opinions about whether or not to strike, that conversation needs to happen. Whether, you can get into a room where it's the senior members that are going to be advising the president on options. They need to be able to have a candid conversation with one another before they bring something to the president, so that everybody's voice is heard. Because if you're just running, hey, the chairman has got the final say on what they bring to the president, I think that that's an unhealthy way to run any kind of an organization. And you brought up one point there of using high-end munitions and other things for a strike like this that would then prohibit our ability to use them later. And I think that for me especially, this is a concept that I've kind of inherently understood for a while, but it's finally playing out on the world stage, and I'm seeing and I'm learning more about this, is that when you move carriers around, they can't be everywhere all at once, all the time. And I think that especially the American people have this idea that the United States military is ubiquitous, that we can touch anywhere on the planet and do any operation at any time. Yeah. And really we can, but if we do one operation, the opportunity cost is that we maybe can't do something somewhere else. So, and we saw this, when with the Ford moving to Iran, even though it was just in the Caribbean, it took time for it to move from the Caribbean back into CENTCOM to be able to do this.
So, two things. One, they do move amazingly fast. I mean,
strategically, they're moving very quickly. Yes.
Yeah, and they're also sovereign assets that don't need anybody's permission to do what they do. And we saw that the UK has prohibited the United States from using Diego Garcia in Iran, which is the island in the Indian Ocean that's been such a strategic asset for the UK and the United States over the years. So it's nice to have aircraft carriers out there. One of the classic examples of public misperception and even congressional misperception over what the U.S. military is able to do all over the world all at once was the tragedy in Benghazi, when people were screaming at the top of their lungs, why wasn't the F-16 that was inevitably hovering over Tripoli, or whatever, going over there and rescuing these people? Well, we don't have F-16s, all over the world hovering, waiting to do something, and it would have taken probably 12 hours to get an F-16 there from Aviano, Italy, with tankers and permissions from Italy and It's in the middle of the night. There are radio towers that are not lit in Libya. I mean, it was just a completely unrealistic perception of the military's ability to respond.
Yeah, there's a lot more planning that goes into sending people and things far into faraway places to execute very complex operations. And I think that is another conversation that we could maybe have at another time of, understanding levels of risk, understanding potential crises when they arise and when they potentially could arise. You're trying to predict the future as to where the next big issue and big crisis is going to be, and then planning. I mean, I don't think people realize in the military the amount of iterative planning that happens for thousands and thousands and thousands of operations that never end up happening, because we always want to be prepared.
The other thing we should have a conversation on is decisions on the use of force.
Yeah.
And there's a definite methodology there that I used along with Marty Dempsey when we were in our seats as chairman and vice chairman. And it's really interesting to apply that methodology to this situation with Iran. But that's not why we're here tonight, I don't think.
No, it's not. But now that you brought it up, I kind of want to hear, if you were to overlay those 5 priorities, interlocking priorities for the use of force, can you please very briefly remind our viewers what they are? And then if you were to run that thought experiment, that mental model currently, obviously without all the intelligence and all of the information, but if you were to run that mental model, could you walk us through that real quick?
Sure. Marty and I needed to be able to give advice to the President and the Secretary of Defense on whether, when, and how you should use force. And we didn't want to make it up as we went along. It's not something you just, pull out from a deep, dark place, right? But unfortunately, sometimes blurt these things out in the situation. It's like, well, we ought to go, whatever, bomb these guys. So we had a method that involved 5 prioritized national security interests. And those interests were survival of the United States as a free market democracy. Number 2 was prevention of catastrophic attacks on the United States. Third was protection of what I call the global operating system, but really the rules-based international order and the global economy combined as one. Fourth was secure, confident, reliable allies, more important, and partners, less important. And then last was protection of and extension where possible of universal values. And we would take a situation like Iran, and we would cast it against those interests to see where there were intersections. Were the intersections high, like prevention of a catastrophic attack or something? Were there many intersections with different interests? Or was there an interest that was intersected very, very deeply? And, for example, if Slobodan Milosevic is murdering his own people, the ethnic Kosovars, then that's kind of like a universal values thing, right? So if you look at Iran and you compare it to those, and by the way, if there's a lot of that happening, we call it high correlation. And if you have high correlation, then you'd be more willing to use national instruments of power, including force, at great cost, at great loss of life and treasure, opportunity cost, as we just discussed, pushing against international law, and so on down the line. So compare Iran to that. Is there a threat to the survival of the United States as a free market democracy? Probably not from Iran. Is there a threat of catastrophic attacks on the United States, all other things being equal? Probably not. Is there a threat to the international order, the global economy, if we don't do something? Probably not.
The only caveat I'd say there is maybe the Strait of Hormuz is in the back of my mind, but yeah.
But nobody has said anything about striking Iran so that they can't close the Strait of Hormuz. They're striking Iran so that they don't have a nuclear weapon, that kind of thing. So the fourth one, secure, confident, reliable allies and partners. Well, we have an ally in Israel. We have a lot of partners in the region who really would rather Iran not have a nuclear weapon. It's interesting that all of those partners don't want us to strike Iran because Iran is weak right now and they don't want to provoke, a global or a regional conflict that could damage their oil infrastructure and the like. Israel tends to always be happy when we strike Iran, especially the nuclear program.
It's a whole other conversation.
And then universal values is an interesting question because, there was talk about strikes in January when there was this massive uprising in Iran where anywhere between 10 and 30,000 people were literally murdered by the regime. And, getting them to stop, the president threatened strikes, which actually was pretty effective. The regime actually stopped killing their people at that time once it became apparent that President Trump might order strikes. So there is, and the demonstrations are kicking up right now. So is the intersection a little bit with reliable allies and partners, universal values. It's what I would call moderate to low moderate interest. So in that situation, You would probably, you could consider using force. You'd want to do it with a lot of coalition partners in that situation rather than doing it unilaterally. You would want to do it under the aegis of international law, which this is definitely not under the aegis of international law. It's under more of a legitimacy doctrine. So, when looking back when this is all over, if it happens, it could be a very questionable move from that sort of cold-hearted analysis. But what could happen is assembling all of this force might actually persuade the regime that they need to come up with a deal here.
Yeah.
And if they do, depending on the scope of the deal, and the president won't get everything he wants out of this, no question, but he'll get something potentially, and that could make all this force movement well worthwhile. So we'll see how it plays out.
I love that mental model that you said, because what it does is it really unpacks the strategic intricacies of making a very, very difficult decision to apply force and to use our blood and treasure to potentially send young Americans into harm's way in a very concise and well thought out and structured way to think about it, which makes the decision process, I think, a lot easier. Yeah. But on the other hand, if you really think about it hard, especially when you try to overlay it into a real scenario, because if you just think about these things on their own, it sounds really nice, neat, cut and dry, very simple. Okay, if it hits one of these wickets, if there's a lot of correlation across multiple different interests, then we'll send it in. But as you look at Iran, it's like, okay, well, there can be arguments there of, okay, well, it's a nuclear weapon, and that might be a catastrophic attack against the United States, or it might be a catastrophic attack against allies and partners, which might have reverberating effects on the economy and the global operating system. And so you can see how different points of view might take this mental model and run with it in one direction or the other. Because, on the Hawk side, it's like, okay, well, we want to strike them so they don't have a nuclear weapon, and boom, 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 everything I just described. Or if you're a Dove, it's, well, it barely clips, the allies and partners, and we're trying to maybe get out of that region a little bit now and focus more on America. And then, but yeah, it definitely does hit that last fifth one. But even still, we've got so much going on at home. So I think the point there is...
There is an important caveat that goes along with the system that I just described, and that is be very, very careful protecting a low-ranked interest if, in so doing, you open up a threat to a higher-ranked interest. So let's compare Iran and Ukraine. I can argue that we probably have a greater interest in ensuring Ukraine's survival than Iran, because if Ukraine falls, there's who knows what's going to happen with Europe and the like. But we have been very careful there. We have not used force directly. We've only used it indirectly by providing weapons to Ukraine because Vladimir Putin has a nuclear weapon. And here we are in Iran trying to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, which so far we've been successful at, because Iran wants to have that caveat. They want to be able to not have you threaten them because you're worried about them having a nuclear weapon and being able to threaten one of your higher-ranked interests. So a very interesting interplay here.
Absolutely, and you tie risk into that too, because you might say, okay, a strike if it's limited risk and there's low opportunity cost, then maybe I do it. But yeah, well, one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about, really the purpose, and we've belabored the point a little bit on Iran, but I think it's important because it's really the thing that's dominating international affairs. But the thing I wanted to talk to you about today was, a lot of these outlets have been reporting on the Ford moving across the Atlantic and into the Med. They've talked about all of the different, the massive amount of forces that have moved into the CENTCOM area of operations. But I would wager to guess that a lot of millennials and Gen Z and Gen Alpha and people in my shoes, active duty service members and recent veterans that have just gotten out of service, are following this a lot more on social media. And one of the things that has concerned me is somewhat of the OPSEC. You mentioned it a little bit earlier when we were talking about Iran and where the Ford currently is. But my biggest concern has been about OPSEC, because we are taught in the United States military from a very young age in our career to be very, very careful about what we share on social media, about what we share to our families, about ship's movement, things like that. But it seems like a lot of this has been very telegraphed in a way that it wasn't even 10, 15 years ago. And I wanted to get your initial reaction, Dad. There was a Instagram Reels video that I'll put up for our viewers who are watching and our viewers who are listening can hear it from a Air Force major who's at their weapons and tactics instructor school.
There are a couple of other challenges that sort of snuck up on us, I think. The first one I want to mention is OPSEC. We talked just now in the last panel about blue AI capabilities, but we didn't spend a lot of time talking about adversary AI capabilities or even civilian AI capabilities. I mean, you've got Twitter feeds of randos that are just studying where our airplanes go and publishing it, consolidating it. Like if U.S. analysts did some of that, we would consider it secret or maybe even top secret. But that stuff is just allowed on the open internet. So operational security, especially when you're talking about a transnational movement with hundreds of aircraft, is really, really difficult to conceal. So OPSEC is a really big concern. I think, and actually reading a recent article about the 35th anniversary of Desert Storm, it's funny that this one is the same.
So I just wanted to get some of your initial gut reaction thoughts to that. I mean, like I said, for us growing up in the military as millennials, social media has been everywhere. Information has been everywhere. Data has been prolific everywhere. But we were still taught, hey, loose lips sink ships. Don't tweet about it. I think it was loose tweets sink fleets was up in the bathrooms at the Naval Academy when I was there. What are some of your initial thoughts? I know that you've done some work with some open source companies that have aggregated information to be able to give alerts quickly. That's one end of it. The other end is these guys who are monitoring all of this stuff and putting it out on social media. What's your thoughts on this?
So my first reaction is everybody complains about the weather, but nobody ever does anything about it. And this is the advance of technology, and there's just nothing you are going to ever do to put that genie back in the bottle. Now, obviously, you want your soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, and Guardians, being secure, with what they say, because they know more than people who are monitoring social media or who are even feeding social media actually know. So you still have to maintain that discipline inside the ranks, but this is something we have to learn to live with, and you can counter it with some deception and put either false information out there intentionally, or just hide your intentions through other forms of deception. And so that's going to have to become more of an art that commanders use. It's interesting. I was the captain of USS Enterprise during 9/11, and there was a month between when 9/11 happened and the first strikes went into Afghanistan. And social media wasn't nearly as ubiquitous in 2001 as it is now, but we had internet on the ship. We had email. Crew members could email their families. So in that 30-day period, there were 3 or 4 times when I shut down the internet on the ship, so that people could not write home, or they could receive emails, but they couldn't send anything out. And that was so that we would condition the families, we would condition the world to the fact that would cook. Because if you only shut it down right before the strikes, then people would go, oops, hey, no emails are coming from Enterprise, they must be getting ready to strike. Well, we conditioned them into not really knowing which time when the internet got shut down that the strikes were going to begin.
I can only imagine the gossip on the streets of America. Right. We can no longer talk to Sailor Johnny. We might be striking Afghanistan now, and it just ends up being nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's kind of sort of a micro example of the kind of thing you can do. But you can head fake, you can feint. Remember the fake amphibious landing in the first Gulf War, where we positioned ships so that Marines were going to land in Kuwait and Iraq. Positioned a lot of forces to counter that, and they got nailed by the left hook that General Powell designed that went in through the desert. Yeah. So it's a cat and mouse game, and we are all going to have to live with the fact that this social media piece is out there. So let's not complain about the weather.
Absolutely. I have a couple of points. I think the first one is this is how I get the preponderance of my news about what's happening with the military and all of that stuff. I mean, I follow a ton of active duty and retired and veteran accounts on social media. And obviously I take everything with a grain of salt, and I'm still reading the newspaper, be it on digital, on apps, and on my phone. But I get a lot of my news and a lot of the open source intelligence stuff that comes out, because a lot of these accounts, and I don't know how they do it, and I've mentioned it a couple of times on the podcast, where I will get videos, I will get pictures, I'll get reporting from these incredible accounts that have connections all over the world, and they'll send in videos. People will send in videos. They'll send in firsthand accounts, and I'll get information sometimes before you will, or I'll hear rumors before you. Not all of them are true before you will. And this open source reporting, I've got a ton of respect for these accounts that are doing it, and I think you're right. we can't stop it. You're not going to be able to put a moratorium on it because they're going to find ways around it. And for the longest time, social media apps like Instagram and Facebook were actually banning these accounts because some of the stuff on there is a little bit graphic, and they would have multiple backup accounts. I mean, like 3 or 4 backup accounts. And in every post, they would say, follow the backup just in case. And people, not only did the original account have, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of followers, the backups had tens, if not hundreds of thousands of followers because they knew that this might happen and that this was a great way to receive reporting from what was actually happening on the ground. And for me, as an active duty military member, I almost feel like it's my duty and my responsibility to be following these kinds of accounts so that I have a better picture of what is happening on the ground and so that I get exposed to things that are actually occurring in case I find myself in those situations. And it is interesting to see how prolific this has become because we talk about derivative classification. When you pull things from multiple different documents, you may declassify one document, declassify another document. You put those 2 declassified documents together, now all of a sudden you've got a top secret piece of information. And when she talks about, okay, well, if I pull this from here, that from there, if a U.S. analyst did it, it would be considered a secret or top secret. But that's open source. And now I think we have to think about how we're releasing things. To your point earlier, to tie both of these together, you've got a ton of military, mass going towards Iran. And if you were to build an operations campaign, if you were to gin this all up, all this open source, maybe that gets Iran to do something that you want them to do. And maybe when you actually strike, I mean, you saw this a little bit in Venezuela, when you actually strike, nobody knows it's coming. Nobody knows what it's going to be like. I mean, if you had asked me what was going to happen before they took out Maduro, I would have said, oh, we're just going to launch a bunch of strikes into Venezuela. They're going to hit a bunch of compounds. I had no idea that they were going to go in and actually pull him out, right? So I think this can work kind of both ways. And I do agree with you. You can't complain about the weather. This is going to keep happening, and I think we have to use it more and more to our advantage. We have to keep this in the back of our mind. It's information. It's the information domain.
Yeah, and it's a competitive industry now where people are competing to get the most current hot scoop out there. And then there are voracious consumers of this, not just because it's kind of interesting and cool, but there are analysts, there are columnists, there are media influencers who use this as their sources of information. And it's really interesting when they trap themselves with a false piece of information that causes them to do some kind of reporting or analysis that ends up being completely not true. But it's that kind of world, and hopefully we're doing the same thing to the other guys. I know that we use open source intelligence quite a lot. I think the intelligence community is also very worried about that. It's very easy to get fooled. You can be unintentionally fooled, or you can be intentionally fooled. So they're very goosey about open source, but they know they have to do it. So they've kind of dragged themselves, kicking and screaming, into doing more open source, including using artificial intelligence.
Yeah. Well, and one last anecdote on this, and I'll caveat this by saying, and I'm not just trying to throw a plug out for them because you're an advisor for them, but Datamier. The United States military uses a source called, or an app called Datamier. And when I was in Iraq, I set my location. And basically what it does is it aggregates a bunch of social media stuff. Correct me if I'm wrong in describing this, but it aggregates a bunch of social media accounts because what they found is that... And
a lot of other sources too.
Yeah, because if a building is on fire, people are more likely to tweet about it before they call 911. Exactly. Or if one person calls 911, everybody else is tweeting about it or putting it on Instagram or putting it on some kind of social media. And so you can set geographic areas. I mean, Lauren has done this, my wife. I do it. And then when I was in Iraq, I got my entire infantry company to download the app and put the geotag location, because the DoD has a contract with these guys, put their geotag location over the area that we were in Iraq. And the amount of reporting that we got, that we were out cycling some of the intelligence that we were getting from our Marine Corps intelligence guys, who were working very hard and were incredibly talented. I'm not trying to take anything away from them and the work that they did. Mm-hmm. But we were sometimes out cycling. It wasn't every time, but we were sometimes out cycling what was happening. And it just gave us a better picture of what was happening on the ground. So I think it's this tug and pull of, okay, we got to be careful about open source. We got to be careful about OPSEC, but at the same time, we can use it to our advantage.
Yeah, several anecdotes there. I remember when Lauren was driving to work one time in Pensacola, And this tragedy occurred when we had a shooter on the Naval Air Station there, and she got the Twitter buzz long before and called her friends and said, don't go to work, because they were actually going to that building.
Yeah.
Quite a remarkable use, which makes me very happy that my daughter-in-law had that app. And then, very early on when I had the app, I was up in Nantucket at a dinner, sitting at a table with several very, very wealthy people. And my phone buzzed, and it was a data miner alert that there was an attempted coup going on in Turkey. And so I asked these guys, tell me when you think, or when you get the information through your sources, that there's an attempted coup going on in Turkey. And they went, what? An attempted coup in Turkey? And it was literally, I think, 30 minutes before any of them got that information through any other source. So, yeah, Data Miner's a pretty cool app. And so, Truth in Advertising, I'm no longer an advisor to them, but I am an investor in them. So just so everybody has that.
Okay. It's good to know.
Good.
Real quick, go ahead.
It's a fascinating world. It's something that I didn't have to deal with during most of my career, but the world changes constantly, and we have to adapt to it.
Absolutely. Real quick speed round for a couple of questions. If you were going to put a percentage on whether or not strikes happen in the next 3 months, what would you put it at? Or you can choose to not answer.
In the next 3 months? It'd be interesting to compare that to the prediction markets. To see
Without
what
looking
saying,
at Polymarket, yeah.
Yeah, I won't look at Polymarket. I'd say it's 80%, maybe as high as 90%. I think the interesting question is, what about the next 10 days? And I would put that at 70%.
Okay.
There's always that 30%.
Are you going to be watching the State of the Union tomorrow night?
I don't know.
It's pretty late. It comes on at 9 p.m.
Oh, well, that's late for an old guy, I guess. But
that's late for me too. I'm trying to go to bed and wake up the next morning. I think I've got a scrimmage soccer game on Wednesday morning. So
interesting story. When I was the vice chairman, the Joint Chiefs attend the State of the Union, and when the chairman is not in town, he's not able to attend, and the vice chairman goes in his place. So I went and actually sat there with the Chiefs as sort of the lead guy, because the vice chairman is the second most senior person during, I think it was one of Barack Obama's State of the Unions. And it was a very interesting, glad I did it once sort of thing, but it's incredibly crowded, and you can't use the restroom, and So I would always, otherwise, I would have a party at my house and have the vice chiefs of the other services over for dinner, and we would sort of laugh and go, hey, we can watch this on TV, and we don't have to put up with all the chaos.
I remember, it's kind of like a designated survivor, except for the vice chiefs. I remember those parties when I was in high school, because you would have a big TV set up in the living room, and a bunch of these 3-4 stars would come over and watch, and that was always cool. It's one of those things. I think I would love to go to a State of the Union once, having been through enough military meetings, having personally sat and ushered for the all generals meeting. If people remember back, I think it was like in October 1st. That happened in Quantico. I was here in Quantico, and the lowly captain got tagged to usher all of these 3, 4, 1 stars. And I mean, getting there at literally 2 a.m. and not leaving until almost noon or 1. These events, they just take forever. But I think doing it once would be pretty cool.
But one of the interesting things for the chiefs who are sitting there, and for the Supreme Court justices who are sitting there, they're the only nonpartisan people in that entire room.
Yeah.
So determining when you're going to applaud, when you're going to stand up and applaud, and when you're just going to sit there stone-faced, is something that's really, really important. And
you could end up on national television if you, especially you, when you were the vice chairman, the lead guy, because if you stand up, the other service chiefs are probably going to stand up with you.
They are, because we make that deal in advance. They follow the senior guy's lead.
Well, and you could be, your face could have been all over CNN if you had stood up at the wrong time. But I think it's relatively easy. I mean, you basically, correct me if I'm wrong, but you stand up when they talk about, maybe investment in the military, or investment in our veterans,
or a veteran who's up in the gallery that they're honoring, somebody like Wounded Warrior. There's just no question there.
Here's a question for you: if they bring Team USA, the hockey team, in, because they were potentially talking about that. This is a hypothetical. If the USA hockey team was there, and then the president calls out the hockey team, would you stand up then?
Of course.
Okay.
There's no question, because it's not a partisan thing.
Yeah, it's a patriotic thing. Yeah. Well, I think that falls into, you've got the military related stuff, the veteran related stuff, but then I think the patriotic related stuff as well.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
well, very cool. Awesome. Thanks for the quick chat, Dad. This is great. This is a topic that I've wanted to talk about for a little while. I'm probably going to do a little more research on it because it's something I'm interested in. Stay tuned potentially for a written piece on it. But in the meantime, thanks for listening and stay tuned next Tuesday for another episode. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Take care.